I am the educated Pachuco, also known as Dr. Luis Mario Cordova Dominguez. You see, I'm a proud Mexican and a proud Latino, and I was born in Mexico, Tijuana, and we were brought over to the United States when I was a year old. So my mother back then was poor. My father had left her with a newborn baby and my brother, who was 2 at the time. So we crossed through the San Isidro border and entered into the Los Angeles, California neighborhood. And my mom back then was poor. She didn't have any money, and she didn't realize that we were settling in a neighborhood that was gang infested. But that was our neighborhood back then. And when I was growing up as a proud Latino, we had struggles back then. We were discriminated against. We weren't a part of a family that was accepted as a citizen of the United States. My mom was undocumented. I was undocumented. And when the Coyotes brought us over, we didn't realize that we had a choice to come to the United States. So with that saying, there's many of you out there that don't feel like you're a citizen of the United States, but you're here, and we have to make the best of it. So as a Latino, male Latino, I want to just emphasize the importance of you focusing on yourself. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been in a situation where I finished my education. And what I want to tell you young guys and girls is that education was my salvation. I'm here because I got an education. And although I did experience prejudice and discrimination, I focused on what I needed to do to reach that point. Now, as a young toddler, I grew up learning the ways of the neighborhood. My mom always used to tell me, hey, mijo, I don't want you to get into the pandillas. I don't want you to get into gangs. So that was her mission in life, is not to have the gangs get me. So I have to be honest with you. Back then, it was our neighborhood, and what I saw in the gangs were just kids being kids, kids protecting each other, kids protecting their territory against others that would discriminate against us. So that's the life I knew back then. Fast forward. I didn't like education back then. I was getting expelled from school all the time because I didn't understand the language. And back then, we didn't have English as a second language to help us learn English. We had to do it the hard way. Watch TV, listen to others talk English, and that's how we got to learn how to speak broken English. So I was neither a Mexican and I was neither accepted as an American. I was the hyphen between Mexican and American, and I believed that. So as part of my upbringing, I didn't have an identity that I can call my own. So was I a Mexican or was I an American? I was really the hyphen in between those two words. So in that process, I was fighting a lot. I was expelled from school, and this was a public school system in Los Angeles. When that happened, my mother was frustrated with me, and then she said, I'm going to put you in a school where they can really change who you are. But the fact is, my mom never knew that I was being bullied in school. I was being called the N-word. I was frequently being told to go back to Mexico. Well, if you know the history of the United States, California was part of Mexico. So I was wondering, hey, what's up with this, man? You tell me to go back to Mexico, but I am in Mexico, man. What's wrong with you? So understanding the history behind the migration and the pattern of who we are as people is very important. So I ask you guys, and I challenge you guys to go back in your history books and reread history of California. So then, when that happened, we went to a Catholic school. And back then, the nuns, God bless them, but the nuns didn't understand cultural diversity. All they knew was you either speak the language or you don't. And back then, I was sitting in a classroom and I was labeled a learning disabled student. because I wasn't up to par with the English-speaking students. Now, did I have a disability? No, I didn't have a disability. My problem was that I couldn't speak the language. So once I started promoting myself and speaking the language, I no longer became that symbol or that stereotype. Went to high school and graduated 1972. From there, I went to college for a semester, but again, I didn't like school, so I dropped out of college. And then I went to work. But then somebody told me that education is critical to your success. So moved out from California to Missouri in 1988. And I had all of these things, all these emotional, psychological issues inside, and I didn't have a way to express myself. So from adolescent to young adulthood, I had these issues inside that I didn't really understand. And it wasn't until later in life when I entered college and I took psychology in my undergrad journey for college that I understood what was wrong with me. Well, I shouldn't say what was wrong with me, what issues I had that I had to talk about and take out of my own system. So in understanding psychology, I started to really like the work of counseling. So I majored in addiction counseling, my undergrad degree, and then immediately after that, I went into my master's program, which is the Master's of Education. It's a science degree in Master's in Education. I completed that, and then after that, I went into my doctorate degree. So the people that know me in the streets call me Dr. Homeboy. You can call me whatever you want because I know who I am. The loss of identity came back in the early years because now I have an identity. I know who I am. I know all the journeys and accomplishments that I have in life. But back then, I was searching for my identity. And this is something that the teachers can use in teaching their classroom. In the 1960s, I was categorized as a Caucasian because back then in the 1960s, you had Negro and Caucasian and Mongoloid. So if you look at that study, you'll see that we didn't fit because we weren't dark enough to be a Negro, but we were light enough to be Caucasian. So I was a Caucasian back in the 1960s based on the census. In the 1970s, during the Chicano movement, civil rights movement, I was a Chicano. And Chicano was a negative term to identify a Mexican who is neither Mexican or neither American. He's a Chicano. He's a no one. But we use the word Chicano to really emphasize our importance of civil rights and education. Education justice. We wanted the education back in the 70s, thus the Chicano movement. In the 1980s, now it was classified as a Mexican American. Remember I talked about that earlier. I was the hyphen between Mexican and American. I was neither American now, because I knew how to speak English, broken English, and I was neither an American. Actually, it's the reverse. I was a Mexican but had broken Spanish, and I was neither an American because I had broken English. So I couldn't speak either language correctly. So that's why I put myself in that middle, the hyphen between Mexican and American. So then, in the 1990s, the government changed the term for Latins or Latinos, Latinx, to Hispanics. But if you look at history, Hispanics, to me, it doesn't encompass Latin America. And that's just me. I'm choosing to be a Latino. The Hispanic, you have I don't know why they call the European countries Hispanic, like Europe, when you say, who's that? The famous singer, Iglesias. He's European, based on where he lived in Europe. That's a European country. But we're all Latinos. So now I choose the word Latino because it encompasses Latin America. So now, as we get into the new millennium, that's what I refer to be called as a Latino. But if you want to call me a Chicano, if you want to call me Mexican American, I understand because I've already been through that journey. So as part of your history and part of your education, I would encourage the teachers to go ahead and teach that part during Hispanic Heritage Month. So moving forward, Who is the educated Pachuco? The educated Pachuco is a character developed by me. It was based on a social experiment I conducted back in the 1990s. And back then I was working with youth gangs. I wanted to work with them because society had said, we don't want to work with these kids. They're lost sheep. Well, no, they weren't. So I decided to go in and work on the west side of Kansas City and work with the gangs in the west side. I had a caseload of 10 gangs members, identified gang members, and we worked to, number one, reduce the substance use, number two, reduce the violence, and then number three, get them to realize that education is important. And we did that through the substance abuse program at one of the schools on the west side. So with that, I said, you know what, I want to see what people would say if I dressed like them. So thus was created the Educated Pachuco. The name Pachuco is spelled P-A-C-H-U-C-O, Pachuco, the Educated Pachuco. So I got myself a brim hat, I got myself my dark glasses, my bandana. As you can see, I have it under my hat. Then I got my Pendleton. And then I have other pants that I use. They're khakis, and they're big. They're wide khakis, or baggies, I call them. So I went walking around downtown, the Marriott. I had a speaking engagement to do for a group of about 1,000 people. And in that, I started walking into the hotel, and guess what? People started looking at me differently because I was dressed like this. So my experiment went well because what I wanted to find out is, number one, what kind of prejudice, what kind of discrimination would I have experienced dressing like this? And I found through the realization that people will react to a certain way we dress. And that's why we were pushing away the young people that were lost, that dress like this, and we were saying they have no hope. I have a different opinion. I feel that all people have hope. We are all people of God. We're here in this earth as human beings. All lives matter, not just mine, but all lives matter. Whether you're black, Native American, Asian American, Hispanic American, Euro American, and whatever else you want to categorize you, we're all one people. So to me, that was the experiment where the Educated Pachuco was created. I am the voice of those people that are forgotten. I am the voice of those individuals that don't have a place to go. I am their voice. And through the Educated Pachuco, I've written columns in the KC Hispanic News, and I offer you guys to go there to the archives and look at all the columns that I've written in the past 12 years. And they're all stories about my journey. They're all stories about the journeys of others. They're all stories about addiction. They're all stories about violence. They're all stories about graduations, about homeboys graduating from high school, homeboys graduating from college. So in ending, I want to remind you that if you want, go into the KC Hispanic News newspaper. That's kchispanicnews.com, and look me under the Educated Pachuco. I've written columns for about 12 years, and you can pick the story that you want to read. And I would ask teachers or the people to help the kids read a story that's appropriate for the classroom study. The other piece to that is I want to encourage you all that education is the most important journey that you will have in life. And if I didn't have mentors to teach me what that meant, I would not have been here today. Education is my salvation, and education will be your salvation. These are the Super Bowl rings of education, starting with my high school degree, going into my bachelor degree with Ottawa University, followed by K-State, my Master's of Science in Elementary and Secondary Education, and then my final degree was my doctorate degree from the University of Missouri. Education is my salvation. So with that said, I would like to say that I wish you a happy Hispanic Heritage Month, and I would like for you to remember the stories that your teachers or that you will find in the history books so that you can learn more about who you are as a Latino, as a Mexican, as a Chicano, as a Mexican American, as a Hispanic, and whatever else name you want to give me. So with that said, have a safe journey, and we'll see you again.